The girl's name was Emma Lou, and she hadn't spoken a word in 3 days. Not since the cold wind carried her parents' wagon down the dirt road and left her behind like a forgotten sack of grain. She sat on the edge of an old church porch, knees pulled to her chest, the skirt of her patched calico dress tucked under her toes to keep them warm. Her eyes, too big for her small face, stared down the path where they'd disappeared. Not crying anymore, just waiting, even though something in her already knew they weren't coming back. People walked past her like they always did. Some slowed, maybe thinking they should stop, but no one did. Maybe it was the silence, or the way she didn't beg. Maybe folks were just too full of their own problems. Emma Lou's silence didn't demand anything from them, so they let her sit there. 3 days. Tom Barrett didn't see her the first time he passed by. He was dragging a broken wheelbarrow full of firewood back to his cabin at the edge of town, his breath fogging in the cold air, eyes fixed on the ground in front of him. A man alone with his grief rarely looked up. Tom had buried his wife 2 winters ago. They said she died of pneumonia, but Tom always believed she gave up. She'd been tired for a long time, since the baby died. After that, something inside her just slipped away. Same with Tom, only he was too stubborn to lie down. He worked the land like it owed him a reason to keep going, and when it didn't give one, he kept working anyway. It wasn't until the second day that he saw the girl. She was still there, barely moved, just a little tighter around herself. He slowed, stared for a moment, then kept walking. His cabin was quiet. Always was. The quiet used to be peaceful. Now it felt like it watched him. That night, the cold came hard. Wind rattled the windows like someone tried to get in. Tom sat at his table, spoon halfway to his mouth, staring at the knot in the wood grain. He didn't know why, but the soup tasted worse than usual. He set the spoon down, put on his coat, didn't tell himself why he was going back. Emma Lou didn't look up when he came back to the church. He crouched down near her, not too close. "Where's your folks?" "Nothing." "You got any kin in town?" She gave a small shake of her head. Tom studied her face, the smudges on her cheeks, the raw skin around her nose, the tight line of her lips. She looked like a ghost someone forgot to bury. "You hungry?" A pause, then the tiniest nod. He stood. "Come on, then." She didn't stand right away, just blinked like she had to be sure he was real. Then she unfolded herself, stiff and slow, and followed him. Tom didn't talk much, and neither did Emma Lou. That first night, she sat at the edge of the chair like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to sit all the way. He made her tea, set a bowl of soup in front of her. She ate slow, like she didn't want it to end. He let her sleep on the cot by the stove. She didn't make a sound all night, just lay curled up with her back to the room. Tom sat in his usual chair, staring at the fire until it burned low, thinking how strange it was to have breathing in the house again. The town started whispering the next day. A widower taking in a strange girl. That sort of thing always stirred talk. But nobody said anything to Tom's face. He wasn't the kind of man folks confronted. Days passed. Emma Lou still didn't speak, but she followed him to the woods when he chopped wood, or helped feed the chickens, or watched as he fixed the roof. He started leaving her little jobs, simple things like fetching water or gathering kindling. She did them without being told twice. But Tom noticed things. How she flinched when he moved too fast. How she never touched the food until he did first. How she kept her back to the wall when she slept. Someone had taught her not to trust the quiet. One morning, he found her outside before the sun was up, scrubbing the porch with a rag in cold water. He didn't say anything. "Just watch her for a minute." "You don't need to do that," he said gently. She kept scrubbing. He crouched down next to her, waited. After a long silence, he asked, "They hurt you?" She didn't nod, but she didn't shake her head either. She just kept scrubbing. He sighed, stood, and went back inside. That day, he hitched the mule and went into town. Bought fabric for a new dress. Picked up some boots. Left them on the chair that night without saying anything. The next morning, she wore them. But it wasn't simple, and it wasn't safe. The girl's parents hadn't just left town. They'd run from something. Word came down through the marshal 2 weeks later. A trader up north had spotted the couple trying to pawn off stolen silver and some forged land papers. The kind of trouble that drew attention. And when they got cornered, they claimed they had a child back in Harper's Creek. Claimed they were only doing what they had to, and someone else had taken the girl. Tom was chopping wood when the marshal rode out to his place. "She with you?" the marshal asked, not accusing, not friendly either. "She is." "She say anything about her folks?" Tom shook his head. "She hasn't said anything." The marshal spat into the dirt. "Well, her father's telling anyone who'll listen that you snatched her. Says he'll come back for her." Tom's jaw tightened. "They left her." "I believe you," the marshal said, "but the law don't move on what we believe. You better be ready if he comes." That night, Tom didn't sleep much. Emma Loom must have sensed it. She came and stood near his chair while he was staring into the fire. "If they come back," she started, her voice dry and quiet. "Do I have to go?" He looked at her. Really looked. Her eyes weren't scared, just tired, like she'd lived too long already. "No," he said, "not unless a judge makes me send you." She nodded and turned to go back to the cot, but she paused just for a second. "Thank you," she whispered. Tom didn't say anything. He just watched her lie back down. He knew the world didn't work in neat lines. People talked like good and bad were separate things, but Tom had lived long enough to know better. Most people were just scared or tired or angry, doing whatever they could to stay alive. That didn't make what they did right, but it didn't always make it simple either. Emma Lou's parents weren't just cruel, they were desperate, and desperate people did ugly things. That didn't excuse them, but it meant they might come back. And Tom would have to decide what kind of man he was when they did. By the end of that first month, the town had started watching Tom Barrett closer than usual. Not openly, just in the way people turned quiet when he walked by, or how they looked just a little too long at Emma Lou when she passed. They didn't understand the arrangement, and people don't like what they can't label. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Amos, had come by with a basket of biscuits and a string of polite questions. But the way she glanced around the cabin, like checking for signs of sin, told Tom exactly why she was there. Emma Lou hadn't said a word to her, just stood in the doorway like a shadow, hands at her sides, eyes lowered but not submissive. Mrs. Amos left after 10 minutes, muttering about the importance of good Christian households and how every child needs a mother's touch. Tom didn't respond. He knew better than to argue with people like her. Her words always had edges. But it wasn't just the church folk who started sniffing around. There was a man named Wendell Coyle, a trader who ran the general store and claimed he could get anything for a price. Wendell had always had a way of knowing things he shouldn't. People said he'd made his money during the war, buying cheap from desperate soldiers and selling high to anyone with a pulse. Nobody liked him, but everyone used him. He stopped Tom in the store one morning, leaning a little too close. "Heard you got yourself a girl now," he said, his smile all teeth. "That a permanent arrangement?" Tom didn't answer. Wendell lowered his voice. "See, I hear things. Things like her folks being in bad trouble. That girl's got heat around her, Barrett. Best not to let it touch you." Tom turned to leave. "You let me know if you change your mind," Wendell called after him. "I got connections. Could place her somewhere quiet. Somewhere profitable." Tom didn't turn around. But that night, he nailed a second lock on the front door. Then there was Evelyn Raleigh. She'd lost her husband in the same fever that took Tom's baby. And for a while, folks had expected the two widowed souls might find comfort in each other. Evelyn was quiet, proud, and capable. The kind of woman who never asked for help and never offered more than she meant. Tom respected that, but they'd never been close. There was a wall between them, always had been. Still, she started stopping by once Emma Lou was around, bringing bread or milk just because. "I'm not asking questions," she said one afternoon, standing with her arms crossed as Emma Lou sat on the porch nearby, sketching a flower into the dirt with a stick. "But people are starting to wonder what you're doing with her." "I'm giving her a roof," Tom said. "She's not yours." "No, but she's not anyone else's either." Evelyn studied him for a long time, then looked toward the girl. "You think they're really coming back?" "They'd be fools to." Evelyn pressed her lips together. Fools are often the loudest. That was the thing about Evelyn. She never warned without reason. And she never spoke unless she already knew more than you did. Which meant Tom wasn't just worrying over ghosts. The threat was real, but Emma Lou didn't seem afraid. At least, not in the usual way. She still didn't speak much, but she was calmer now, more present. She started leaving little things around the house. Flowers in an old bottle, pieces of string woven into knots. She made a doll out of scraps and gave it to Tom without a word, as if he was the one who needed it. Tom started seeing her in his wife's old rocking chair, feet barely touching the floor, pushing gently as she watched the rain. The chair had been empty for so long it had started to feel like a monument. But when Emma Lou sat in it, the house breathed different. Softer. Still, the unease didn't leave. The marshal came back 2 weeks later. This time, his horse was lathered and his face drawn tight. They crossed in a dry creek 2 nights ago, he said, without needing to explain who they were. Ran a scam on the innkeeper, stole a wagon, left a woman tied up behind the saloon. They're moving fast. Tom's hands curled around the axe handle he'd been using. And a girl. They're asking about her, offering money. Said she was taken by force. That's a lie. The marshal nodded. I know that. But they're telling it to anyone who'll listen. And some folks are listening. Tom didn't say what he was thinking, which was that if those 2 snakes were telling stories, someone in this town was bound to believe them, and someone else was bound to sell him out. Money had a way of bending spines. And sure enough, the next night, Wendell Coyle showed up again. He didn't knock. Just stood at the edge of the property with his hat in hand, like he'd wandered by accident. Tom met him at the fence. I had a visit, Wendell said, his voice low. 2 people asking about a girl. Described her real clear. Offered $50 for anyone who could help. Tom said nothing. Wendell looked past him toward the cabin's dimly lit window. That kind of money turns heads, Tom. I turned mine away this time, but I'm just one man. Tom stepped closer, his voice like gravel. You so much as whisper her name again, I'll bury you where the grass don't grow. Wendell didn't smile this time. He just tipped his hat and walked off. But Tom knew what that meant. The misdirection had started. The town was full of half-truths now. Rumors stacked on rumors. Emma Lou's parents weren't the only ones with secrets. Everyone who came near them seemed to carry their own shadow. Evelyn had started asking too many questions, not out of kindness, but as if she were trying to match puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. And Tom had seen her talking to the marshal when she thought no one was looking. Even the preacher's wife, who'd once hinted at charity, now passed the girl in the street with tight lips and eyes full of judgment. The whisper network was growing. One morning, Emma Lou found a note tucked under the porch. Just one sentence. He doesn't belong to you. She handed it to Tom without a word. His face hardened, but he said nothing. He burned the note that night, then sat up with the rifle across his knees. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was not knowing who to fear. The girl's parents were the loudest threat, sure, but they were far away for now. The real danger might be someone much closer, someone who'd smile at them by day and betray them by night. Tom had always believed you could know a man by the way he looked you in the eye. But lately, even the honest ones seemed to blink too much. And he couldn't help but wonder, if it came down to it, who would actually stand up for this girl? Who would look past the stories and see what she really was, a child left behind, not a prize to be claimed. Emma Lou was still just a girl, but she wasn't naive. One night, she looked up at him from her chair and said quietly, "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he said, "they won't." She nodded. "Then I won't either." It was the first time she sounded like someone who wasn't afraid anymore. Tom felt something shift in his chest. She wasn't just surviving. She was learning how to stand. Maybe he wasn't just protecting her anymore. Maybe he was helping her become someone who didn't need protecting. But the question hung heavy between them. Would that be enough when the world finally came knocking? The knock came just before dawn. Tom had already been awake, sitting at the table with a rifle laid out in front of him, cleaning the barrel slow and steady like he was polishing a thought he hadn't dared speak yet. The knock wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. Just two soft taps like someone testing the door, unsure if they should be there. Emma Lou was still asleep on the cot by the stove, her breathing soft. She hadn't had a nightmare in almost a week. Tom had started to believe maybe the worst had passed. He opened the door with a rifle in one hand. It was Evelyn. Her eyes were puffy, her shawl clutched around her like she'd dressed in a hurry. "You need to come with me," she said. Tom didn't move. "Why?" "It's the preacher," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "He's been talking to the marshal. Something's not right." Tom stepped onto the porch, pulled the door shut behind him. "What kind of not right?" Evelyn hesitated. "He says there's papers. Documents claiming your girl was bound to a family up in Montana. Adoption papers. Sealed. Suddenly they show up in town with witnesses." Tom stared at her. "That's a lie." "I know that," she snapped. "But the law doesn't. And you're not exactly popular around here anymore." That part, Tom didn't argue. The last few days had been thick with silence. The kind of silence that came before a storm, when people moved too quickly out of your way, when shop doors shut a little harder than usual, when neighbors who used to nod stopped meeting your eyes. Wendell Coyle had been seen drinking with the preacher. The marshal's face had grown harder, like he was caught between what he knew and what he'd been told to believe. "Why are you telling me this?" Tom asked her. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Because I know what it's like to lose a child. And because you and I, we may not have ever figured out how to talk, but I know you're not the kind of man who takes something that isn't his." Tom glanced back toward the cabin. "She's mine now, whether the papers say so or not." "I thought you'd say that." She stepped closer. "They're coming. Maybe today. The marshal's trying to stall, but he can't hold off a warrant if one gets wired through." Tom closed his eyes for a beat. "Thank you." But she caught his arm as he turned away. "There's something else." He waited. "I saw the girl's mother," Evelyn said. "Yesterday. She came into the store. I didn't know who she was at first. Said her name was Miss Hannah. Said she was looking for her niece. But then I saw her look at Emma Lou through the window. That wasn't an aunt's look. That was possession. That was a woman ready to burn everything down to take back what she threw away." That night, Tom checked and rechecked every bullet. He cleaned the rifle twice, then stood by the window long after the lamps were out, watching shadows move across the yard. Something was wrong, deeper than just the parents returning. The next day, the preacher's wife stopped Emma Lou in the street. Tom saw it from the blacksmith's window. The woman knelt in front of her like she was talking to a stray dog. Emma Lou stood still, not answering, just staring down at the gravel. When she came back, her face was pale. "What did she say to you?" Tom asked. Emma Lou hesitated. "She said I was a burden, that you were too good a man to waste his life on someone like me." Tom crouched down in front of her. "You're not a burden. Not to me." Emma Lou gave a small nod, but he could see it, the crack the woman's words had made. She'd heard that same thing before, from the people who were supposed to love her. 2 days later, it all broke. It started with Wendell Coyle getting drunk and loud at the saloon. He was waving a telegram in one hand, boasting that justice was coming for that bastard Barrett and his stolen girl. The preacher tried to quiet him, but the damage was done. By the time the marshal arrived, half the town had gathered outside the store. The telegram was real. It named Emma Lou's parents as her rightful guardians and ordered her return. It was dated from a judge's office in Helena, Montana, where the parents had supposedly fled after Dry Creek. Tom knew what that meant. Someone had paid to make this happen. Probably Wendell. Maybe the parents. Probably both. "I need to see the girl," the marshal said quietly. "No," Tom replied. "I don't want to do this, Tom. But the law's not giving me a choice. She's not going anywhere." Tom didn't wait for the conversation to end. He turned, walked back toward the cabin. Emma Lou was already on the porch, as if she'd known. "I heard them," she said. "They're going to take me." "No," Tom said. "Not if I have anything to say about it." That night, they didn't sleep. Tom packed a bag, filled it with food, blankets, bullets. They'd head west, into the hills. He had a friend near the mining camps, someone who owed him from the war. They could lie low for a while, figure things out. But before they could leave, Emma Lou asked him something strange. "Do you think I'm bad?" He stopped what he was doing. "What?" "My mama. She used to say I ruined everything, that I broke things without trying, that God gave her a curse instead of a child." Tom went still. "She said I was the reason my baby brother died, that I took all the air in the house. She said maybe if I hadn't been born, he would have lived." Tom dropped to his knees in front of her, rough hands on her shoulders. "Don't you ever believe that?" he said, voice low but sharp. "She said those things because she couldn't carry the weight of what she'd done. So she tried to give it to you, but that weight was never yours." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Why do people want to hurt each other like that?" "Because they're scared," Tom said. "Because sometimes it's easier to break something than to fix it." The next morning, they were ready to leave before dawn. But someone had been watching. Wendell. He blocked the path out of town with his wagon. A smug grin on his face, a rifle leaned across his lap. "You really thought you could just run?" Tom kept his hand near his sidearm. "Get out of the way. You pull that trigger, you'll hang." Tom took a step forward. "If I do, I'll make it count." Wendell's mouth twitched. Then he smiled and leaned back. "She's not worth this, Tom. She ain't yours. She's a ghost." "She's not a ghost," Tom said, his voice shaking. "She's a child. She's my child." Wendell didn't move, but someone else did. Evelyn. She came up from behind. No sound at all, shotgun in her arms. "You heard him," she said, calm and cold. "Move." Wendell hesitated just a second too long. Then he moved. They left town before the sun broke. Tom didn't look back. In the hills, they found quiet. It wasn't easy. Nothing ever was. But the days were safer, and the nights weren't filled with fear. Emma Lou laughed once. Just once. Chasing after a rabbit with her arms out and her braid bouncing behind her. Tom nearly cried at the sound. And that's when the last reveal came. One night, as they sat by the fire, Emma Lou turned to him and whispered something he never expected. "They were my real parents." Tom stared at her. "I heard them talking once. They said my mama died having me, that I was left at the church in a basket. They only took me because the town gave them money." Tom felt something caving inside his chest. "I thought maybe if I was good, they'd forget I wasn't theirs." He swallowed hard. "You don't have to be good to be mine." She didn't reply, but she leaned against his side and stayed there, quiet. The stakes had changed. It wasn't about outrunning the law anymore. It was about rewriting what law couldn't name. It was about claiming each other through choice, not blood. Through action, not paper. And no one, no telegram, no false parent, no preacher's whisper could take that away. They were 3 days from the mining camp when the storm hit. It came without warning, thunder rolling over the ridges like the mountains were growling. The rain started as a slow drizzle, but within an hour, the sky cracked wide open. Tom had barely gotten the lean-to up before the wind tore part of it loose. He held Emma Lou close under the tarp, his body shaking from the cold, and she clung to him, wordless. The woods had grown dark in a way that felt more like being swallowed than nightfall. For the first time since they'd left Dry Creek, Tom wondered if maybe they'd made a mistake. By morning, everything was soaked. Their matches wouldn't strike. Emma Lou's lips were blue. He wrapped her in the last dry blanket and carried her for miles, stumbling through mud, praying for something, anything. They came upon a hunting cabin by chance, half-rotted and leaning, but the roof held. Tom broke the lock and pushed the door open, set her down inside. There was a fireplace and a few broken chairs, but it would do. As he got the fire started, sparks hissing off damp wood, Emma Lou finally spoke. "They're going to find us." He didn't answer. Couldn't. He wanted to tell her no, that they wouldn't, that they were safe now. But he knew better. Wendell wasn't the kind of man to let things go. Not if he thought he could win something from it. And Wendell wasn't alone anymore. 2 days later, Tom found proof. He went out hunting and found boot prints by the river. Deep ones, too wide for his or Emma Lou's feet. Someone else had been nearby, following, watching. The prints didn't match any miner or trapper he knew of. He followed them for a stretch, keeping low. That's when he saw them. Wendell, the preacher, and a third man, older, with a flat mouth and silver hair. A lawyer. Maybe. He carried a satchel that looked like it held documents. Tom froze in the brush, heart pounding. They were arguing. She's just a child, the preacher said, voice tight. Maybe we should let it go. She's property, Wendell spat. She's proof of their sins. And he stole her. Tom felt something snap at his chest. That night, he didn't sleep. Emma Lou had fallen into a shallow fever from a cold. He sat by her, wiping her forehead, watching her mouth twitch in restless dreams. She whispered names he didn't know. Some of them might have been imaginary. One might have been her real mother. He'd never know. Her past was a trail of lies and silence. The next morning, Evelyn arrived. She hadn't said how she found them. Maybe she followed Wendell and peeled off when the trail split. Maybe she'd always known this would be where Tom went. She came in fast, so pale. They're close, she said. Wendell's planning to take her by force. There's a judge riding with him, one who doesn't care about the girl's past, only the money she's tied to. Tom stared at her. Money. Evelyn nodded. That family, her so-called parents, they had a claim back in Montana. Something about a settlement for land they lost. Government money. But they can't collect unless they prove they had dependents. Emma Lou's their proof. She's worth hundreds, maybe more. Emma Lou stood behind them now, trembling. They don't want me, she said. They want what I'm worth. Evelyn walked over and crouched beside her. Honey, you're not a price tag. You're not a number on a paper. You're a person, and you got people now. Ones who love you. Emma Lou looked up at Tom, but something in him had shifted. That night, he sat alone by the fire, gun across his lap. Evelyn came over slowly, sat beside him. You're thinking about doing something, she said. I'm thinking about ending it, Tom murmured. Before they get close. Before she hears another word about being property. She's not going to forget what they already did. No, he said, but I can make sure she never has to live it again. Evelyn studied him. You're talking about blood, she said. I'm talking about justice. She didn't argue, just sat there for a long time, until finally she stood. I'll help, she said, but I won't watch. The next morning, Tom was gone. He left a note, told Emma Lou to stay with Evelyn, said he'd be back before sundown, said he needed to end this his way. There was no kindness in the words, just clarity. He tracked them by the river again. They'd made camp by an old trading post, half burned, abandoned since before the war. Wendell was there, talking loud like always, bragging about what he was owed. The preacher looked sick. The lawyer said little, just kept pulling out maps and papers. Tom watched from the ridge, heart tight, and then he walked down into the camp like he had nothing to lose. Wendell saw him first. Stood, grinning like a man who already thought he'd won. Well, look who showed up to return the girl. She's not yours, Tom said, stepping closer. She ain't yours either. Tom raised the rifle. You're wrong about that. The preacher scrambled back. The lawyer froze. Wendell didn't. He reached for his sidearm, but he was too slow. Tom fired once. The bullet struck Wendell just below the collarbone. He dropped to the ground, screaming. The preacher shouted, "No." Tom aimed again. I'm not here to kill anyone, he said. I'm here to make this clear. You come near her again, you'll wish I had. He turned to the lawyer. You take your papers and burn them. You touch that child with the law again, I'll send you back without your hands. No one moved. He walked away, but the line had been crossed. The preacher caught up with him later, out in the woods. His face was pale, his hands shaking. She needs more than this, he said. She needs forgiveness. Tom turned. From who? From God. Tom's voice was flat. God didn't abandon her. You did. The preacher broke then, told Tom the truth, that he'd known Emma Lou wasn't really their daughter, that he'd seen bruises on her once, that he'd written letters to the diocese asking for help, but no one responded. And so you kept quiet, Tom said. I didn't know what else to do, the preacher whispered. You did nothing, Tom growled. That was your choice. He left the man there, knees in the snow. When Tom got back to the cabin, Evelyn was packing. They know where we are, she said. We need to move again. But Tom shook his head. No, he said. We end it here. Let them come. Let them try. Emma Lou walked over and took his hand. Are you going to shoot more people? She asked softly. His throat tightened. Only if I have to. I don't want more dead people. Tom nodded. I know, he said. Neither do I. But sometimes he thought dead people stayed buried. And sometimes they walked around with names and power, hurting anyone smaller than them. He was done letting them. That night, he buried his rifle in the woods. Not because he wouldn't use it, but because he needed to remember that Emma Lou was watching now. She was learning from him. How he responded mattered. Who he became, she would carry. But even still, he kept the revolver at his side. When the law came the next morning, Tom was ready. The marshal arrived with the lawyer in tow. Winter wasn't there, laid up somewhere, bleeding and angry. The preacher had gone silent. It was just them now, the ones who wore badges and said they followed order. Tom met them on the porch. The lawyer tried to speak. Tom cut him off. I'm not handing her over. She is not your anything. The marshal hesitated. He looked at the girl behind the window. Then at Tom. I can't protect you, he said. I know. You shoot again, and I'll have no choice but to bring you in. Tom gave a slow nod. Then bring me in, he said. But she stays. The standoff lasted only a minute longer. Then the lawyer, seeing there was no victory to be had, turned and left. The marshal stayed another moment. I hope you know what you're doing, he said. I do, Tom answered. As the dust settled behind the departing wagon, Emma Lou stepped onto the porch beside him. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Then she looked up at him. I'm not scared anymore, she said. Tom swallowed hard. Good, he said. Neither am I. But the truth was, he was scared. Scared of what he might still have to do. Scared of how close he'd come to being the kind of man he'd once hated. Scared of what that would teach her. And yet, he was hers now, and she was his. Whatever else came, they would face it together. Even if the world kept trying to break them apart. Even if the law never forgave them. Even if the people in town kept whispering behind their backs. They had crossed the line now, and there was no going back. The night was thick with silence, the kind that wraps itself around a person until even their own breath sounds too loud. Tom sat on the creaking porch of the battered cabin, the only light coming from the flickering fire inside. Emma Lou was asleep on the floor, wrapped in the last dry blanket. His hands trembled slightly as he rolled the worn revolver in his fingers, the weight of what was coming pressing down on him like the cold mountain air. He knew they were coming. The law, the preacher, Wendell's men, maybe even some strangers he hadn't seen before. They wanted the girl, and they wanted her badly. But what Tom didn't fully understand was just how deep the lies and betrayals went. How many faces smiled in friendship while hiding knives behind their backs. Tonight, all of that would surface. A sudden rustling in the brush made Tom snap upright. Evelyn stepped out of the shadows, eyes wide and restless. They found us, she said, voice low. They're moving faster than we thought. The preacher's made his choice. Tom's heart sank. The preacher, once a hesitant man trapped between faith and fear, had chosen a side, Wendell's. That meant the only people who'd stood for Emma Lou now stood against her. Why? Tom demanded. Why betray her now? Evelyn shook her head. It's not just the money anymore. The preacher's afraid. Says if the church loses the claim, they lose face, and he'll be the one blamed for letting it happen. Tom closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of Emma Lou's pale face, the trust in her eyes. How could anyone betray a child like that? But betrayal wasn't new to him. Not anymore. The night grew colder, and the sound of hooves shattered the stillness. A dozen men appeared, led by the preacher, his eyes hollow but resolute. Behind him, Wendell limped, supported by two others, his face twisted in anger and pain. Tom stood slowly, stepping out into the firelight. It's over, he said. Leave her be. The preacher laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You don't understand, Tom. This girl is a key. To the church, to the law, to every crooked man who wants a piece of her past. One of the men spat in the dirt. She's a prize, and you can't stop us. Tom's hand went to the revolver at his hip, but he didn't draw it. No, he said, I'm done with guns tonight. That moment was a trap. Wendell pulled his pistol and fired. Tom dove to the side, a bullet tearing through the wooden porch where he'd just stood. The air exploded with gunfire. Men shouted, horses whinnied in panic, and Emma Lou screamed from inside. Tom scrambled inside, heart pounding. Emma Lou was on the floor, her hand pressed to a bleeding wound at her side. Evelyn was holding her tightly, her own face pale with shock. No, Tom said, dropping to his knees beside them. Stay with me, Emma Lou. The firelight cast flickering shadows on her face, now pale and strained. I'm scared, she whispered. Tom swallowed the lump in his throat. I know, kid, but you're going to be all right. I promise. Outside, the shouting continued. Tom heard footsteps pounding toward the cabin. The preacher's voice rose above the chaos, shouting orders, but Tom's world had narrowed to the small body in his arms. The door crashed open. Wendell stepped inside, gun raised. Tom grabbed a revolver and fired twice, forcing him back. Wendell staggered, cursing before retreating. Tom turned back to Emma Lou. She was fading fast. No, Evelyn said, panic rising in her voice. We need to get her to a doctor. There's no time, Tom said. I'll do what I can. His hand shook as he tore a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. Emma Lou whimpered, the pain raw and terrible. Tears burned in Tom's eyes. He hated this world, hated the cruelty that forced him to fight like a cornered animal to protect a child who had done nothing but suffer. The cabin door burst open again, and this time the marshal himself stepped inside, gun drawn, eyes hard. Drop it, Tom, he commanded. Tom looked at him, then at Emma Lou. She's hurt, Tom said. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The marshal hesitated, glancing at the blood on the floor. This isn't justice, the marshal said quietly. This is survival. Tom shook his head. Survival is all I've got left. Suddenly, a loud crack sounded outside. The roof groaned. A horse stumbled and fell. Men shouted in alarm. The preacher appeared at the doorway, clutching his side where a bullet had grazed him earlier. You'll pay for this, Tom, he hissed. Tom squared his shoulders. Maybe, but not tonight. The marshal lowered his gun slightly, eyes flicking between the two men. For a long moment, the room was still. Then the preacher lunged. Tom fired again, and this time the preacher went down, collapsing with a broken cry. Outside, the remaining men fled into the night. Tom sank to the floor, breath ragged, eyes fixed on Emma Lou. Evelyn took his hand. She needs help. I need to fix this, Tom whispered. That night, Tom sat alone, watching over Emma Lou as she fought for life. The weight of every choice, every shot fired, every betrayal pressed down on him. He was no longer just a man protecting a child. He was a man who'd crossed lines he never thought he would, and the cost was higher than he'd imagined. When dawn broke, Tom made his decision. He would take Emma Lou away, far from the land, from the claims, from the shadows of greed and cruelty. But to do that, he'd have to leave everything behind. His name, his past, even the fragile hope he'd built. He looked down at Emma Lou, fragile but breathing, and knew this was the only choice that mattered. Come on, kid, he whispered. We're going home, wherever that is. The road ahead was uncertain, but Tom was ready to face whatever came, knowing that protecting her was worth any price, even if it meant losing himself in the process. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the dusty road as Tom and Emma Lou disappeared into the horizon. The town they'd left behind. The preacher's crooked promises, Wendell's brutal greed, the law's cold indifference, grew smaller with every step. The quiet that followed felt different now, heavier somehow, like the calm after a storm that had torn more than just timber and skin. Tom carried Emma Lou on his back for most of the day. Her wound was healing, but her spirit was fragile. She didn't speak much, only sometimes reaching up to hold his hand or glance his way, with eyes full of questions he couldn't answer. Tom knew there were no promises left for either of them. Not from the law, not from the world, but in this moment, at least, they had each other. Back in town, the fallout from that violent night spread like wildfire. The preacher never recovered from his wound. His body failed before his conscience did. And in his last days, whispers said he prayed, not for salvation, but for forgiveness he feared he'd never earn. The church distanced itself quietly, erasing his name from records, as if that could wash away the shame of what he'd done. Wendell's fate was darker, left to bleed in the woods. Found by a passing trapper days later, he lived just long enough to curse everyone who'd crossed him. No lawman came for him, and no friends mourned his passing. His greed had eaten him alive, leaving behind only stories whispered in saloons about a man who'd lost everything chasing ghosts. The lawyer, too, vanished. Rumors said he fled east, haunted by the memories of a child caught in a web of lies and greed. Some said he tried to make amends quietly, but no one in town ever saw him again. As for Tom, the road ahead was uncertain. He carried the weight of the past like a shadow that refused to fade. He knew people would call him a vigilante, an outlaw, or worse. Maybe they were right. But every scar he bore, every sleepless night, was a testament to a promise he'd made. Not to the law, but to the girl who trusted him. Emma Lou grew stronger each day. Her laughter returned slowly, fragile at first, but real. In Tom's eyes, she was no longer a prize to be fought over, no longer a pawn in a game of greed and power. She was a person, her own person, with a future that neither the preacher's lies nor Wendell's cruelty could take from her. One evening, as they sat by a small campfire, Emma Lou looked up at Tom and said, "Do you think they'll ever stop chasing us?" Tom smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Maybe, maybe not, but I'll keep running with you until they do." She nodded, settling closer. For a moment, the world felt wide and full of possibility. But as the stars blinked awake overhead, Tom couldn't shake a quiet, bitter thought. Sometimes, he mused, the ones who survive are the ones who carry the heaviest burdens. And sometimes, justice isn't about laws or guns. It's about the choices that haunt us long after the dust settles. The road behind them was littered with broken men and shattered promises. The road ahead was unknown, but they were moving forward, together,